All right. Yes, here we go, folks. Arm of Truth Radio, number 78. And greetings. Welcome. Dilly Gill is with us out there. Good to see you. Not exactly the dream is with us. Critical Mass is here. There's Seth the Saxon, Eddie Vasquez, everyone showing up. Where are you? Are you late? Are you late? Come on in. Come on in. There's Miss Ostrich. Okay, folks. Welcome to the stream. The 78th rendition of the thing we call the Armor of Truth Radio show. Sometimes we call it the Armor of Truth Radio Marathon, but sometimes, not all the time. Okay, most of the time. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about that thing that is so obvious that still many people have a hard time grasping. They're lying to you. That's kind of a stark way to start everything out, but they're lying to you. Who? Who's lying to you? Well, listen, a lot of people are. Do they know they're lying to you? That's a tougher question. So what this really means is we have to go deeper and deeper to find out why it is that the lying is necessary, according to those who do the bulk of it. And that brings us to the point of something known as the noble lie. Essentially meaning it is a replacement for truth. Obviously with the term lie in there, but we'll get into that very specifically here in just a moment, letting a few people show up here on this live stream. So we do have to talk about the origin of the idea, this thing called the noble lie. We have to talk about why it's important for us to understand. So first of all, this is going to go into, this is why scientism is a thing. The noble lie, scientism is an element of the noble lie. And today, the noble lie is global. This lie is noble and global. And when we mean noble, it might be more accurate to say it's an ignoble lie. The lie is noble according to those who tell it because they believe that it's in everyone's best interest. Most of the time. I'm sure that there are some who know the ultimate truth. But the modern church, what we know as the modern church today, the visible church, the brick and mortar, and the people make up the visible church. We don't know who is converted, regenerated, saved from one person to the next. We can't see that. God can see that. That's the idea of the invisible church. God sees the invisible church. That's what we can't see. We can't see the heart. God can. But this idea of the modern church, the visible church, it is no longer producing people who look radically different from the world. Have you noticed that? The teachings in most, I don't know what to say most, I would just say maybe a great number of, a great proportion of the modern church is no longer producing people who look any different really than folks who have rejected God. That's interesting, isn't it? As we move through the stream of time, that the church has become so complacent. And I mean us, not just the brick and mortar. I mean us. We are too. Normal cultural progress is expected now. In other words, we don't live in the same context as our first century predecessors. Our life is going to look different. Our life is going to be lived in a different way, just on some very fundamentally basic aspects. But normal cultural progress is expected. However, compromise toward the church or the body, compromise now has compromise of a sort that looks indistinguishable from a fallen world, of man-centered ideologies. That is not acceptable. Let's say it in a more succinct way. Normal progress, cultural progress, is to be expected, but compromise that leads the visible church to be indistinguishable from a fallen world of man-centered ideologies is not acceptable. Dallas Willard, theologian, apologist, Christian, of course, made this comment. He said, most people in our churches, now this was many, many years ago that he said this, but very much relevant. He said, most people in our churches believe in Jesus, but they don't believe there's a God. How about that? Do you ever consider that? Wouldn't it be interesting if you could? Now, many people may not admit this openly. They may not be willing. They may be ashamed. They may be ashamed that they don't believe in God, but they belong to this church and they participate in it. Isn't that interesting? Most people in our churches believe in Jesus, but they don't believe there's a God. How did that happen? Replacing ultimate eternal truth with something that's easier for me is how that happens. And it makes people more susceptible to something like a noble lie, if it should come along. So how does Satan fight to deceive? Or what's one of the important ways that Satan deceives men and women? Number one, by removing God as a viable option. Number one, removing God as a viable option. That is the first way Satan deceives. That is the first lie, the beguiling statement that Satan delivered in Genesis chapter 3, questioning whether or not God's even a viable option even. And remove God as a viable option and then replace that eternal truth with a pragmatic, even scientific, perhaps, truth. There's Paul's Deep. Paul's Deep, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Paul's Deep has used this YouTube super chat option there that you can find in the chat. Paul's Deep. Paul's working today. We appreciate you joining in with us, brother. But pay attention to your job, man. What are you doing? Thanks. I appreciate that, brother. So Satan removes God as a viable option and then replaces that eternal foundation with something that's easier for us to grasp, feels right to us, appeals to our baser instincts, in other words. That's how it becomes possible. Eddie Vasquez. Eddie Vasquez just wanted to hear the beep. My friend, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed the beep again. I'll change that around every now and then, but thanks. I appreciate that very much. All right, so to understand why we're going into this study today, we understand the modern church is no longer producing people who look radically different from the world. In many cases, it seems to be a social club. Many people seem to be very sincere about what they're doing, but it's not actually Christianity that they're sincere about. It's the fellowship that they're gathering from this other religion that has formed. The only problem there is that there's no truth underlying it. It's all subjective. And to reiterate what Dallas Willard had said years ago, most people in our churches believe in Jesus, but they don't believe there's a God. There's a general mindset that we can work with. We can see that that's present in our society. And of course, to recap, Satan deceives by removing God as a viable option in the mind and replacing that solid foundation, that rock, with something that feels right. Maybe even a scientific truth. Now, so, a noble lie. Before we get into this now, I have some articles here, just some ways for us to, not necessarily articles, but I'll share here with you just for example, what Wikipedia has to say about the idea of noble lie. This is going to come out of Greek philosophy for sure, but we're going to apply it to today. We're going to see how this is relevant. In politics, a noble lie is a myth or an untruth, often, but not always, sometimes of a religious nature, that is knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. So in the idea of politics, which is really, that's what's permeating everything in the current narrative today, is politics. I believe, thank you. I believe has used that link on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there. Either that or the PayPal link, but one of those two. Thank you very much. That is the Streamlabs link. Thank you. I believe I appreciate that. Very helpful at this time of the month. So in the political sense, a noble lie is the myth or untruth that's used by an elite, or we could just say the ruling class uses this myth or this lie, this untruth, this thing that's not real, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain harmony or to advance an agenda. This idea of a noble lie is a concept that was originated by Plato as described in his Republic. In religion, it's known as a pious fiction. It's a narrative that is presented as true by the author, but is considered by others to be fictional, albeit produced with an altruistic motivation. We see both of this. Now, what we're looking at here is this is where climate change, climate crisis, anthropomorphic climate crisis comes from. And you would have to assume that most in fact, of the people involved in the false environmentalist movement right now would be people who are sincere and genuinely convinced of the data that they're handed or the story that they're told, the models that they've seen, the scientism that's been preached to them. So this is how the political and the religious noble lie, the noble lie and the pious fiction come together into what we see today, this push for globalism, a technocratic utopia, with the underlying message being, we're killing the planet, and now the planet is striking back to kill us. Evidence, please. Well, so there's where the narrative comes from. That's where it starts. There's also this idea here from, I'll share this with you. From Cambridge Companion to Plato's Republic, which is available online here. There's a summary about Plato's noble lie. Let's get an understanding, because we know, listen, these folks who are running the show, they're not dummies. They understand philosophy. They understand political science, obviously. Nothing that you're seeing played out on the public stage today it was decided a decade earlier. There's no way a government could exist for very long at all if it didn't have its operations, if it didn't have its planner extending out at least a decade ahead, many times more. So we ought not be surprised by anything we see. Socrates' introduction of the Republic's notorious noble lie comes near the end of Book 3. It says this, quote, "We want one single grand lie," he says, "which will be believed by everybody." Now, if you're not familiar with Plato's Republic, is his writing about what a perfect society would look like. Of course, you'll hear it's a very establishmentarian point of view. But he says we want one single grand lie which will be believed by everybody, including the rulers. Including the rulers. The rulers must believe the lie too. Ideally, but failing that the rest of the city. A grand lie, a noble lie. G.R.F. Ferrari has a good note on the issue. He says, "The lie is grand or noble by virtue of its civic purpose." So there's a good behind it. So what is that? We're saving the world. I see. That's the good that's under it. We're saving the world, as if man is in any position to save the world. As if man has any power to do such a thing. Friends, if a comet was headed toward the planet, we would be dust. There's no way we can save the earth. He says here, but the Greek word can also be used colloquially, giving the meaning on which there might be argument about the translation. Some prefer to lie the more neutral falsehood, which need not imply deliberate deception. So now we're playing around with morals. So there's obviously a moral implication here. Some people don't like the term lie; they prefer the term falsehood. It's the same thing, but it shows you that there's a moral conundrum underlying all this. It is wrong to lie to others, and we know it. We know it. So there is no such thing as a noble lie. Now, people will make the case that, yes, we had to lie to them to get them out of there, to save their lives. These are circumstantial. Different circumstances. We're talking about something for which there is no actual evidence for being presented. Others prefer the term fiction, perhaps trying to prescind from questions of truth and falsehood altogether. Cornford had a bold flight of invention. There's another term. The noble lie could be called a bold flight of invention. Yeah, it's still the same thing. He says, I think lie is exactly the right term, but the argument for that will emerge later. All right, so the noble lie is essentially to serve as a charter or myth for Plato's good city, a myth of national or civic identity, or rather two related myths, one grounding that identity in the natural brotherhood of the entire indigenous population, the other making the city's differentiated class structure a matter of divine dispensation. In other words, there's a noble lie that our leaders descend from gods. It's a necessary lie because it keeps everybody in line, right? And if everyone's in line, then we have peace and prosperity, is what they would say. If people can be made to believe it, they will be strongly motivated to care for the city and for each other. But is that what's behind climate change? If people can be made to believe it, is this what's behind climate change or perhaps health crisis? If people can be made to believe it, will they be strongly motivated to care for the earth or one another? I think absolutely. If people were shown evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt, and there wasn't so much politicization of these topics, it might be easier to be less skeptical, but we can't afford to not be skeptical today. But anyway, the noble lie, if people can be made to believe it, then they will be strongly motivated to do whatever that thing is they're being asked to do. Give up your rights anyway. Remember, they can't take them away from you. You have to give them up. But if you can be frightened into giving them up, well, there you go. There's an opportunity. Now, what are we actually getting at here? Science and reason. And I mean specifically, I don't mean just science in general. I mean atheistic evolution. And materialism is really what I'm speaking of when I say the term science here. Science and reason cannot answer the hard questions about existence. They cannot answer the hard questions about existence. Why are we here? And what is our purpose? What happens to us after we're done here? Science cannot answer any of those questions. Science can't answer some very basic questions as to why am I conscious? Can't answer it. Has nothing to say about that. Cannot answer the hard questions about existence, and man has greatly rejected truth that is eternal. Once again, and exchanged it for something that feels more right in the moment. There's a moral breakdown in the world, and mankind must find a way to get everyone walking in the same direction, but without Jesus Christ. Everyone can see that there's a moral breakdown in the world. Everyone can see it. But those who are outside of Jesus Christ have no answer, no way to figure out, no way to guide anyone. So, therefore, the noble lie. We have to create something to get everyone on the same page, or we're going to lose control of this whole thing. There is a moral breakdown in the world, and mankind must find a way to get everyone walking in the same direction without Jesus Christ, therefore into ever-increasing error. So that's all of these, terrorism was the boogeyman for a long time, to get everyone on the same page, walking in the same direction, but not with Jesus Christ. With us, the globalists, not with Jesus Christ. And of course, climate change comes a-roaring in a big way after that to become the new boogeyman, to get everyone walking in the same direction, but without Jesus Christ. And then now we've seen something that's related to climate change, which is this massive health crisis of some kind that's intended to get everyone walking in the same direction or sitting in their homes, but without Jesus Christ. And therefore, into ever-increasing error. In other words, people become more confused about reality with every noble lie that comes along. The noble lie is the globalist, technocratic utopian, materialist answer. It's the only answer they have, is to tell these so-called noble lies, these necessary untruths. It's for your own good, right? We're all in this together. We're all together alone. Whatever that means. It means nothing. So what is the globalist, technocratic, utopian, materialist, atheistic, evolutionist answer? Climate change, virus, health scare. You can't protect yourself. You can't protect yourself. How are you supposed to protect yourself from a changing climate? You can't. There's nothing you can do about that. That's why it's such a good, noble lie. In fact, to say that there's a climate crisis that somehow we can fix if we just elect the right people to fix it. See the problem there? And at the same time, there are just as many scientists on the opposite side of that opinion. So there is no consensus, actually. You'll hear people say, oh, climate crisis, anthropomorphic climate crisis, it's just settled science. It's the consensus opinion. It's the consensus among the people that the media usually polls, because they're polling their people. So it makes no sense. Same thing with the current health crisis. Same thing. Just as many doctors and scientists on the opposite side of the opinion of the common narrative that we see today. Therefore, there is no consensus on what we're seeing and being told. And of course, finally, coming in, the purpose for it all, the Great Reset, which we talked about here quite a bit. We've done a lot of work with Days of Noah on that very issue, so if you're not up to speed on that one, Days of Noah's videos that's where you go to get a good basic underpinning on the whole idea of the Great Reset. And some of the videos that he and I have done together go into depth on that as well. But this is how great lies are accepted. This is how you get a stunned public to respond. An existential crisis is presented in the hyper-real. It doesn't have to be something that you even see in the real world. You could never experience anything about climate crisis. You could never experience anything about global health crisis just by walking, hitchhiking across the nation, and you would never experience any of this stuff. It's because it exists in the hyper-real world. It exists in the land of screens. But anyway, an existential crisis is presented in the hyper-real world. The hyper-real is the world that has no reference to the real world. It is a map without a territory. In other words, meaning hyperreal, it has gone so far, it has evolved so far beyond the actual territory or the actual real world that it doesn't even resemble the real world anymore. So an existential crisis is presented in the hyperreal, and then there's a period of induction for you and me, or initiation, that we're put through. Induction or initiation to the fear. In rituals and rites, Masonic rituals, one of the first elements of that is to create a sense of foreboding, a sense of fear. The lights are down, a noose around the neck. Put you in the position of a slave to make you feel like you could lose your life right now as you take this oath. Going through this experience that will bond you to these people. That's what's being done to all of us with the fear. We're being inducted. We're being initiated into the new globalist technocratic utopia We're being inducted, and that is being done through fear, as it is done in all rituals. Fear has always been a component of a rite of passage. And so the existential crisis is presented. It's not in the real world. It doesn't have to be. Remember, it's just a ritual. And then we're inducted, initiated by going through the fear, and then the ready solution, the solution that was already prepared, is rolled out. And everyone's like, oh, I'm not in fear anymore, and I'm trauma bonded to my leader now, and we're so happy because the noble lie keeps us happy. Problem is, it's not true. It's not true. Where are all my atheist friends out there who love reason and logic so much? Where are they on these issues? You don't have to be a follower of Jesus Christ to see the problem here. And that ready solution, this process of presenting the crisis, of course, problem, reaction, solution, we all know what it is done over and over and over and over. Okay, now there's an article. Now, I don't know if any of you guys follow The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. Will, over on his channel, is, I appreciate his work. He really finds some good stuff. And he did a remake of an older video. Not a remake of an older video. He used a clip from an older video last night with an article from 2005 that I want to share with you that is perfect. Perfectly states what we're talking about here. I will skim through the article. I need to put the article link this in the description for you as well. So let me make a note to do that. I forgot to do that before the stream. But this article... Well, let's just do it. Let's just jump into it here. There you go. How's that for a title? The Gnostic myth of Darwinism and sociopolitical utopianism. Now, the title's a little bit of a mouthful, but what's the title actually saying? Darwinism is a myth. Is Darwinism a noble lie? Perhaps. Why? Intended to get people away from following Jesus Christ. Whether that was the intention of Darwin or not, I don't know. That's not the point. Charles Darwin is not our adversary. Satan is our adversary, and it's his intentions. And he chooses to work through people. He has the opportunity to work through people. So Darwinism is a myth. What kind of myth? Well, it appears to be a myth that resonates more with Gnosticism. The idea that flesh is evil. That matter is evil. And sociopolitical utopianism. We talk about that here all the time. The idea that man can change the world just because we will it so. Really? You really think that? 20th century, where we've murdered more people per capita than any society before in history, in known history. Just murdered them for political reasons. Wasn't even a war. In some cases. It was just leaders massacring their own people. That's a great gift of atheism. And people say, of course, those were people who are atheists who did bad things. That doesn't mean all atheists are bad. Of course, that's true. It doesn't mean atheists can't behave morally. That's not the point. Where do you get your sense of morality from? If you have a sense of morality, you're borrowing it from God. But anyway, the idea of socio-political utopianism, this is the globalist technocratic utopia, or the idea of it. We have a plan to change the world and to recreate it in our image. And to get there, we have to get everybody walking in the same direction, but without Jesus Christ. Because why? Why without Jesus Christ? Because we're going to have to lie to people. And when someone's a follower of Jesus Christ, it's very tough to lie to that person. And I know that goes against all the thinking. That goes against all of the atheist thinking. That Christians are gullible people. Maybe that is the most gullible statement ever. So Philip D. Collins wrote this article in March of 2005. He says, when the publication of the Da Vinci Code and the release of the Matrix films, Gnosticism has experienced a cultural revival in the West. Is the rise of Gnostic thinking simply a fleeting trend like the outrageous clothing that Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera wear one day and never don again? So this article is about 15 years old. Perhaps, yet it is interesting to note that the popularization of Darwinian evolution preceded to Gnosticism's ascendancy in the West, preceded Gnosticism's rise in the West. So what he's saying is, we see Gnostic thought in our society, in the West, in the United States or UK, or we see a rise in Gnostic ideas. You know, Jesus wasn't real person; he was just a spiritual being, and all of this theosophy, the popularity of the New Age movement. That most of that is it can be classified in one way or another as Gnosticism. Once again, Gnosticism just in a rudimentary sense sort of turns Genesis chapter 3 upside down, where the serpent is the hero. Because he's there telling you that you've forgotten that you're a God. The significance of this fact becomes evident when one reads the words of Dr. Wolfgang Smith, who said this: as a scientific theory, Darwinism would have been jettisoned long ago. The point, however, is that the doctrine of evolution has swept the world, not on the strength of its scientific merits, but precisely in its capacity as a Gnostic myth. Evolution as a Gnostic myth. It affirms, in effect, that living beings created themselves, which in essence is a metaphysical claim. Thus, in the final analysis, evolutionism is in truth a metaphysical doctrine decked out in scientific garb. In other words, whenever you hear evolution, specifically used as a description for how life began, you're hearing someone express to you a metaphysical idea. It's not a scientific idea. Evolution as the source of life is not a scientific. It's not borne out by science. Science cannot account for creation. Science stops where the laws of physics stop. And when you get to creation, that's where they began, by the most common cosmological model of the day. So whatever was before that is metaphysical. In other words, it is a scientistic, not a scientific, but a scientistic myth. There's that word scientism again. And the myth is Gnostic because it implicitly denies the transcendent origin of being. Remember, to make the case that God must be transcendent, timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, all you have to do is logically follow, why does anything exist? Time, space, and matter. Well, that would require something beyond time, space, and matter to bring it into existence. But we don't know of anything other than time, space, and matter. That's no argument that it's not there. Science is limited in what it can tell you. And the myth is Gnostic because it implicitly denies the transcendent origin of being. For indeed, only after the living creature has been speculatively reduced to an aggregate of particles or a bag of chemicals or a meat robot or whatever they say we are today, only after being reduced to pointless particles does Darwinist transformism become conceivable. Darwinism, therefore, continues the ancient Gnostic practice of depreciating God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. It perpetuates, if you will, the venerable Gnostic tradition of Jehovah bashing. And while this in itself may gladden Gnostic hearts, one should not fail to observe that the doctrine plays a vital role in the economy of neo-Gnostic thought. For only under the auspices of Darwinist self-creation does the good news of self-salvation acquire a semblance of sense. Of course, once again, in the Gnostic sense, one saves themselves. And that's the same thing in humanism. Humanism, you are your own savior in humanism. And I thought that was very interesting because this is a perspective that shows us that Darwinism is underlying Gnosticism. This is one of the reasons for the growth of the New Age movement and so much spiritual error is this underpinning of Darwinism that most of us are fed throughout our early lives. Now, we're talking about scientism here. So it's important to make sure that we understand what we're talking about when we say scientism. Here's a text that is really good. It's meant for the layman, and it'll help you understand a lot about what we're talking about here. Written by a Christian apologist. Scientism and Secularism by J.P. Moreland. You want to understand how to respond to someone who is a materialist, who believes only in energy and matter, and what they can seem to produce, or that science is in fact the ultimate source of knowledge. This will help you. Scientism, roughly, is the view that the hard sciences like chemistry, biology, physics, astronomy provide the only genuine knowledge of reality. At the very least, this scientific knowledge is vastly superior to what we can know from any other discipline. Ethics and religion may be acceptable, but only if they are understood to be inherently subjective and regarded as private matters of opinion. In other words, you can't talk about religion in scientific circles. According to scientism, the claim that ethical and religious conclusions can be just as factual as science and therefore ought to be affirmed like scientific truths may be a sign of bigotry and intolerance. Let's read that again. According to scientism, the claim that ethical and religious conclusions can be just as factual as science and therefore ought to be affirmed similarly may be a sign of bigotry and intolerance. You hear that today, don't you? If you don't happen to accept the scientism that's preached to you on the evening news, then today you might be called intolerant. If you start out, they'll call you a science denier, but if you don't change your ways quickly, they might just call you a bigot. You might even be called a racist. That's how confused we are today. Before looking into more depth at scientism, now, the view that the hard sciences alone have the intellectual authority to give us knowledge of reality. J.P. Moreland here goes on, he shows some concrete examples of how it is part of everyday common sense. So, for example, scientism in schools. Scientism is found not only among those writing columns in popular magazines. That is where you see scientism played out the most. Articles in popular scientific magazines, for sure. Not just scientific magazines, all magazines or websites. However, especially out on YouTube, with some of these very, very famous, well-known, popular YouTubers who take up conspiracy topics every now and then, things like that. There lots of good stuff out there too. You really have to be discerning today. He says, though, it is also the required dogma in our schools, scientism. Not science, but a religious adherence to the statement that science is the ultimate source for all truth. That's what's taught in school, public school. It is the dogma in our schools, where it directly challenges Christianity's claim to be a knowledge tradition. For example, consider the science framework issued by the state of California in 1989, designed to guide its public schools' science curricula. The document offered teachers advice about how to address students who expressed reservations about the theory of biological macroevolution. Now that is one animal changing into a completely different animal. That's the idea of macroevolution. And it can go back, this will be argued by some theistic evolutionists, but it is commonly understood that macroevolution is the idea that life comes from one common ancestor. So in this document, in this state of California put out in 1989 to advise its teachers, it says, at times, some students may insist that certain conclusions of science cannot be true because of certain religious or philosophical beliefs they hold. It is appropriate for the teacher to express in this regard and say something like, let's say, for example, a child says, I don't believe the earth so suppose the child says, I don't believe that myself and my brothers and sisters and all of us in the room, I don't think our ancestor is a monkey. Okay? Let's say a child says that in class. I don't believe that our ancestors are monkeys. Teacher, I don't believe that your ancestors are monkeys. And the California Board of Education said, here's what you can say to that child. I understand that you may have a personal reservation about accepting this scientific evidence, but it is scientific knowledge about which there is no reasonable doubt among scientists in their field. And it is my responsibility to teach it because it is part of our common intellectual heritage. Unquote. Now, first of all, is that true? Is this part of our common intellectual heritage? Yes, it is part of our common intellectual heritage, but it's not the whole of our common intellectual heritage. And what about this where it says, but it is scientific knowledge about which there is no reasonable doubt. So anyone who doubts this message is not reasonable. So this statement's significant comes not so much from its promoting evolution over creation. In fact, that's not even the point I find here. The point I find here is you can't ever address the honest question of a student. The statement's significance it's promoting evolution over creation, but from the picture of knowledge, it presupposes that knowledge about reality comes only from science, and empirical knowledge claims derived from the hard sciences are the only claims that deserve the backing of public institutions. That's really what it's underlying. This kind of reasoning seems to imply that religious and philosophical claims are simply matters of private opinion or feelings, which, by extension, means ignoring claims at the core of ethics, political theory, and religion. Words such as conclusions and evidence and knowledge and no reasonable doubt and intellectual heritage become associated with science, giving science the right to define reality. While words like beliefs and personal reservations are associated with non-empirical claims, framing religious beliefs as mere ungrounded opinions. Put simply, the state of California is requiring that all students abide by the dictates, not merely of science, but of scientism, or a religious system of adherence to science as the source of total truth. It is a religion, folks. It is a religion. Two types of scientism, strong and weak. We don't have to get into that too much today, but why does it matter? Why does it matter? Because scientism today is in the air we breathe. We consider it both normal and essential. Scientism. We've been led into this way of thinking. Very few people are aware of what it does to a culture and to the church. Remember what I just said a moment ago when we started this out. My claim was that the modern church is no longer producing people who look radically different from the world. The modern church is just putting out people who are just like the world in many cases. We're seeing a compromise in the body where it's becoming indistinguishable from the world, from the fallen world and the fallen creatures in it. That's a problem. It puts Christian claims outside of the plausibility structure. That's what people generally consider to be reasonable and rational. And this has led to a number of shifts in how our culture processes reality. Now think, as we read through this, think about how everyone has just accepted the idea of a global crisis, an existential threat to humanity, in fact, is how it's been presented to us, where large numbers of positive tests are some kind of indication that you need to have a babysitter come and make sure that you don't walk outside your bedroom without covering your face. One of the effects of scientism then is making the ridicule of Christianity's truth claims more common and acceptable. This is why I started the YouTube channel, one of the reasons. Because out on YouTube, out on the internet, there's a huge movement of, it's very cool and hip today to be the popular atheist, popular skeptic out there destroying the truth claims of Christianity, one after the other. The truth of that is, nobody's doing that. There's a lot of claims to that, and there's a lot of people who don't know the difference between a good argument and an appeal to emotion, for example, are being taken in by even Christians. But one of the side effects, obviously, is to make it easier to ridicule the truth claims of Christianity. Even within the church, it has harmed our efforts to produce mature disciples of Christ from both children and adults. So these concerns go like this. Scientism puts Christian claims outside the plausibility structure. In other words, what you're saying is if science is the only way to know reality, the only way to know reality, then the truth claims of Christianity cannot be true. But is the claim that the only way you can know reality is through science, is that true? Can science even account for its own method? So the idea is to make the truth claims of Christianity unworthy of rational consideration. So we've seen that. We've seen that happen a lot, and that's one of the reasons apologetics has also grown recently. Out of necessity. Someone has to be out there helping people to understand that this attack on Christianity through governments and globalism and atheism, these attacks can be answered. Christianity can be defended. The truth can be defended today. Without our being aware, we all carry with us this cultural map informed by scientism. It's ingrained into us as children, most of us anyway. And that is a set of natural assumptions that we make, like self-talk, default beliefs, which we naturally accept without argument, or things we'd feel embarrassed to believe. For example, claims contrary to the authorities in our cultural map. If you believe in young Earth creation, have you ever been in a room and you're the only person in the room who affirms a young Earth? And have you ever been shy to say that out loud? Or you just believe in God and you believe in that God is the creator. Have you ever been ashamed to say that out loud in a classroom? Maybe a science classroom. That's the goal. One of the goals of scientism is to make it seem ridiculous. Scientism has brought about several shifts that now define our culture. First shift is in the realm of religion and ethics, and it's a shift from knowledge to blind faith. Please let that sink in. What has happened has not been we've become more reasonable and we've stopped believing. We've stopped having blind faith. Affirming that all life came from one source, that all life came from one cell. That's faith. That's blind faith. The story of atheistic evolution at all is blind faith. So we haven't gone from less blind faith to more knowledge. It's gone the other way. The Christian can follow the evidence wherever it leads. The materialist has to stop whenever the evidence begins to show that there's something occurring outside of the laws of science. Then they have to stop. They have no answer for any of that stuff. Therefore, they can't tell you the full measure of reality. The second shift in the realm of guidance for living one's life is in the realm of guidance for living one's life, and it goes from truth to the immediate satisfaction of desire. Like we say here all the time, from eternal truth to pragmatic truth. Scientism tells us that there is no truth related to the meaning and purpose of life. The difference between right and wrong or virtue and vice, life after death, and of course, God himself. And even if there were truths in these areas, no one could have a clue as to what they were. Remember Joe Rogan a couple weeks ago? There's no way to know what those guys in the Bible meant. Really? Is that true? When we investigate it, we don't find out that the Bible has come to us, translated through all the many languages and down to... No, right from the original language into the language in which we read it. For example, it follows that truth as a first priority guide for living must be dethroned. Truth as a first priority guide for living must be dethroned. All the while, the message is we're affirming truth and reason. In fact, they're not. That's one of the noble lies. That's one of the deceptions. Now, the third shift is in ethics, and it goes from positive duty and virtue to do no harm minimalism. This is kind of like when we talked about the victimhood culture the other day. United States of America anyway, was founded on the ideas of a dignity culture where the individual would have dignity. The individual would have rights. The move now is to change that over to something like an honor culture. And to get us into an honor culture, We have to travel through victimhood culture because an honor culture is about one's reputation. And in order to keep your reputation, you have to do what the society thinks is reputable, which means you can't be an individual. Given scientism, moral knowledge is impossible. If scientism is true, if materialism is true, then moral knowledge is impossible. And the loss of moral knowledge has meant a shift from a view in which duty and virtue are central to moral life and to a minimalist ethical perspective. If duty and virtue are of central concern to the moral life, then there must be moral knowledge available to know what duties and virtues are correct and how one can become a righteous, virtuous person. This is the point. You claim to have an objective morality. Where did you get that from? Moral rules without knowledge degenerate into customs, such as don't eat your peas with a knife. And customs are too trivial to marshal the courage and effort needed to live by and internalize them. Now, the fourth shift, very important, is related to the third one, but is manifested in the area of freedom, moving from a classical model to a contemporary version. Classically, freedom meant the power to do what one ought to do. Thus, one is free to play the piano if one has the skills, training, and knowledge necessary to play it. Similarly, if one is free in life, if one has the power to live in the way one ought to live. Sexual freedom in this context means the power to live a chaste, holy life and to engage skillfully in sexual activity in the way in which we were designed by God, in marital union between husband and wife. Classic freedom is liberating, but a necessary condition of such freedom is the availability of the relevant sort of knowledge. Absent such knowledge, contemporary freedom has come to be understood as the right to do whatever one wants. So, undermining moral knowledge is the point here. Scientism has provided the context for the contemporary view of freedom and consequently has led to moral chaos. So if you can tell the people that the idea of moral freedom is do what thou wilt, that's the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Whose will? Your will. Whatever your will is, go do it. That's a virtue now. But does that match with reality? Does that match with real happiness? Scientism warrants a shift in how we think about and practice tolerance, for example. Now, we see that word brought up a lot today, tolerance. The culture, the world culture is being changed. It's being groomed. We're all being groomed for a globalist culture. And tolerance, the idea of tolerance has to be part of that. Tolerance is not a healthy thing, folks. It's something that we all ought to practice when we can, but it's not a good thing to have happen to you. That's when for example, just basically when your body becomes used to that which is harmful to it. And this is moving from a classic model to a contemporary one also. On the classic view, one tolerates persons, not their ideas. In this sense, even though someone disapproves of another's moral beliefs and practices, he or she will not inappropriately interfere with them. However, it is consistent with this view that a person would judge his opponent's views to be wrong and would dedicate himself to doing everything morally appropriate to counteract those views, for example, using argument and persuasion. Classical tolerance presupposed the reality of moral knowledge. Interesting. We can't presuppose that now, can we? For that reason, it cannot survive in a culture of scientism. Scientism has led to increasing hostility toward Christianity. Scientism has derailed the church from making disciples and has made Christian parenting less effective. There's more to be said about that later on. In fact, scientism is the enemy of science. Neither form of scientism, neither its strong nor its weak version, adequately allows one to state and defend the necessary presuppositions that justify even practicing science. How do we break that down? You can think of that in terms of models. We see models all the time. Look at these models of the virus. Look at these models of the climate. What's underlying those models? Those models didn't create themselves. Those models didn't come to us on golden plates. Those models were created by human beings who plugged data into them. Those models are only as good as the presuppositions that are used to create them. If those presuppositions are wrong, or if those presuppositions contain the noble lie, the model's going to reflect that. So in light of this intriguing observation, one could view the current rise of Gnosticism as the natural corollary of Darwinism's unquestionable epistemological primacy in the West. The current Gnostic revival could represent the next stage of Darwinism's metastasis. It's interesting to note that the British Royal Society, the Masonic institution responsible for the promulgation of Darwinism, I'll read that again. The British Royal Society, the Masonic institution responsible for the promulgation of Darwinism, rigorously imposed a division between science and theology upon the halls of scientific inquiry. Webster Tarpley characterizes this division as literally Gnostic, just ticking all the boxes. The restriction of scientific research to the corporeal machinations of nature is redolent of Gnostic thinking. It is a distortion of Platonic metaphysics, the conceptual framework of which emphasizes a separation of the corporeal, the becoming, and the incorporeal, which is the being. The framework bears close resemblance to the traditional Christian Weltanschauung, which divides existence into the spiritual and physical. However, Gnosticism rejected the Christian Eschaton, or the ending, the last thing, study of the last thing. Gnosticism rejected the Christian Eschaton of heaven and hell. This is where the distortion begins. According to Gnosticism, the physical universe is hell. It's where we are right now, according to Gnosticism. Corporeal existence is a prison. So living here in your body is a prison. That's like being in a prison that fetters man through the demonic agents of space and time. However, through revelatory experience, or gnosis, coming to know these occult truths, the sensate being of man could be transformed, and this hell could become heaven. Does this sound like Cain, for example? Cain, going to build heaven on earth, all the descendants of Cain seeking to build and create heaven here on earth, in their own image, of course. You could see Gnosticism is rampant, even whether or not people realize that's the ideology they've taken on. Guided by this Gnostic axiom, the Freemasonic Royal Society redirected scientific attention exclusively towards the material world. By focusing scientific efforts upon the temporal spatial realm, the members of the Royal Society probably hope to see the eventual transformation of the irredeemable physical realm into the immanentized eschaton of an earthly heaven. And here's the idea of this article. Immanentization, making it imminent, making the eschaton, making the end seem like it's right here. Immanentizing the Eschaton is what this means. Making it seem like the end of the world is 12 years away. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would say, for example. Maybe even Bill Gates would say that. I haven't heard him say that, but... So the idea that the end is just around the corner, but we, your leaders, we can see around that corner, and we'll tell you. We'll tell you how to react. We'll tell you what you need to be doing. So how do you get people to believe that the end is right around the corner? You know, that the oceans are going to rise and flood everything out and completely change the climate on the earth. How do you make people fall into this? How do you make people follow along with it without questioning it? Well, this is the noble lie. This is where the noble lie comes in. It's about saving the earth. Our push to own everything on the planet is actually about saving the earth. The truth mixed with the noble lie. That's what it would sound like if they spoke openly. And they do sometimes. They do sometimes speak openly. Just listen to Klaus Schwab. Listen to what Klaus Schwab says. Google or YouTube Klaus Schwab. Listen to what he has to say. He'll tell you exactly what the New World Order is, because they're the ones who have put the foundation down. This was also the ultimate objective of Marxism, which was disseminated on the popular level as both fascism and communism. It is no coincidence that, historically, both the Nazis and the communists exhibited a religious adherence to the Gnostic myth of Darwinism. Smith writes, in place of an eschaton, or an ending to the story, which ontologically transcends the confines of this world, the modern Gnostic envisions an end within history. An eschaton, therefore, which is to be realized within the ontological plane of this visible universe. According to Vatican insider Malachi Martin, the former Jesuit priest who apparently left the order and left the church even, and wrote several books. But anyway, he said the Italian humanists who eventually created speculative Masonry reconstructed the concept of gnosis and transferred it to a thoroughly this-worldly plane. Both Nazism and communism were birthed by organizational derivations of Masonry. Both Nazism and communism were birthed by organizational derivations of Masonry. Given Gnosticism's derision for all things corporeal, or having to do with the body or the flesh, it is extremely paradoxical that its adherents exhibit such a preoccupation with this material plane. They do tend to want to gather as much material possessions as possible, don't they? That seems to be what they do. So there's obvious contradictions built in there that they can't see. Nonetheless, the eschaton must manifest itself within the temporal spatial realm. Gnostic psychologist Carl Jung said this. According to the alchemists, Basilius Valentinus, the earth as prima materia is not a dead body, but is inhabited by a spirit that is its life and soul. All created things, minerals included, draw their strength from this earth spirit. This spirit is life, and it gives nourishment to all the living things it shelters in its womb. So, the Gaia principle, the earth is a living being. That's a romantic notion, but come on. Clearly we don't have to fall into that. But now that is where Darwinism leads you, ultimately. It comes as little surprise that Darwinism, which is premised upon metaphysical naturalism and materialism, is so compatible with Gnosticism. Both emphasize the primacy of this material plane. Had such a metaphysical doctrine remained confined to the realm of academic polemics, it may have been harmless enough. However, this was not to be the case. Let's see if this is a little better look at the article. The Gnostic myth of Darwinism eventually migrated from the abstraction of speculative philosophy to other areas of study. With this migration, Darwinism enjoyed epistemological primacy. Julian Huxley, there's a Huxley under every rock. If you just keep looking, you'll find one. Julian Huxley, I believe he was Darwin's bulldog, the one who Darwin was maybe a little shyer than necessary to carry the message of his findings. So Julian Huxley was one who tended to argue for him. Perhaps if someone wanted to debate Darwin, they would debate instead Huxley. But anyway, Julian Huxley said this: the concept of evolution was soon extended into other than biological fields. Inorganic subjects such as the life history of stars and the formation of the chemical elements on the one hand, and on the other hand, subjects like linguistics, social anthropology, and comparative law and religion began to be studied from an evolutionary angle. Until today, we are enabled to see evolution as a universal and all-pervading process. So, Julian Huxley. Inevitably, the Gnostic myth of Darwinism subsumed social and political theory. The result was the socio-political utopianism that underpinned all of the 20th century scientific dictatorships. All of the 20th century scientific dictatorships. That's technocracy, folks. Scientific dictatorship that's the same idea as technocracy. And globalism is a technocratic idea. Nazi Germany stands as a prime example of a Gnostic scientific dictatorship edified by Darwinism. In other words, the idea of a master race is Gnostic. And it is supported very well by Darwinism. Survival of the fittest. In fact, Darwinian Sir Arthur Keith candidly admitted, he said, quote, "The German Führer, as I have consistently maintained, is an evolutionist. He has consciously sought to make the practice of Germany conform to the theory of evolution. Darwinism's natural correlative, Gnosticism, was also present. Nazism was premised upon the occultic doctrines of a Gnostic cult called Ariosophy. Ariosophy. So there's a term for you that we need to check out. Armanism and Ariosophy are esoteric ideological systems pioneered by Guido von List and Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, respectively, in Austria between Ariosophy, meaning wisdom concerning the Aryans, was first coined by Lanz von Liebenfels in 1915 and became the label for his doctrine in the 20s. So this is that Aryan idea that came out of the East and was changed up a bit. Nazism was premised on Ariosophy, which promoted the rule of Gnostic elites and orders, so a bloodline, and the stratification of society according to racial purity and occult initiation, the ruthless subjugation and ultimate destruction of non-German inferiors, and the foundation of a pan-German world empire. Such fantasies were actualized with terrifying consequences in the Third Reich. Auschwitz, Sobibor, and Treblinka are the hellish museums of Nazi apocalyptic, the roots of which lay in the millennial visions of Ariosophy. So think about this. The rule of Gnostic elites and orders, the stratification of society, that means creating classes, creating new classes. We can argue that that's what we see happening today. We're creating new classes. We're getting rid of the middle class. That's what the Great Reset is. No middle class. There's a ruling class, and then there's everyone else. And that everyone else will be on an equal level of poverty throughout the world. That's what equality is in this new world order. And this new globalist, this new beautiful vision that they're handing out to you, that's what equality means, that everyone is in poverty together. So the same leaders, the same bloodline leaders, stratification of society into new classes according to racial purity and occult initiation, and that was specifically German, and the ruthless subjugation and ultimate destruction of non-German inferiors. Now, who are the inferiors today in the movement that we see now? It's Gnostic. It's much like the movement in Germany in the late 20s, early 30s. Yeah, if you're not on board with the scientism, if you're a science denier, whatever that term means, what that term actually means today is if you're somebody who's questioning what the television is telling you is real, then you're an inferior. Your reputation is going to be sullied. Remember, we're not about dignity culture anymore. We're about honor culture, where everyone has to uphold the reputation. And how do you uphold your reputation? You don't ask questions. And you do what you're told. The Holocaust, which was an orgy of violence and death, represented Nazi Germany's efforts to immanentize the Eschaton, bring the end of the world, bring us right up to the edge of what felt like the end of the world. In essence, Germany qualified as a Gnostic scientific dictatorship, edified by the science of Darwinism. Communist Russia also exhibited all of the characteristics consistent with this profile. Now, Communist Russia is one we look at a little closer, because that's the kind of ideology that's trying to get it has got a foothold now. Here in the West, specifically Canada, United States of America, of course, Mexico, and then through this, Central America and South America, communism is seeing a rise. And people are asking for it. They don't know it's communism, but they're asking for peace and safety. Something that no man can give you. No man can give you peace and safety. For some reason, people all over the world are convinced that they can. It's fear. It's been initiated by fear. So the Encyclopedia of Religions explains that both Hegel and his materialist disciple Karl Marx, might be considered direct descendants of Gnosticism. In fact, Hegel is the ideological nexus where Gnostic scientific dictatorships of Nazism and communism intersect. In The Secret Cult of the Order, Anthony Sutton states both Marx and Hitler have their philosophical roots in Hegel. According to the Encyclopedia of Religion, the Gnostic Kabbalist named Christoph Oettinger significantly influenced Hegel's early work. From Hegel would spring two of the worst scientific dictatorships in history. Both of them were Gnostic at their core. In this century, with the presentation of traditional religious positions in secular form, there has emerged a secular Gnosticism beside the other great secular religions. The mystical union of fascism, the apocalypse of Marxist dialectic, the earthly city of social democracy. The secular Gnosticism is almost never recognized for what it is, and it can exist alongside other convictions almost unperceived. That's a very good point, because that's what we see happening. We see this worldview, or this ideology, more appropriately, running right alongside what appear to be it appears to be, in other words, it has to be shown to be a viable option, and God has to be removed as a viable option. So the New World Order, the new globalist technocratic utopia, we can say confidently is Gnostic at its core. It must be. As history has graphically demonstrated, the various religious crusades to immanentize the Eschaton, once again that just means to bring everybody right up to the end of the world, these are deadly serious. The truth is tangibly evidenced by the atrocities committed by the socio-political utopians of secular Gnosticism. Both Auschwitz and the Soviet Gulag are products of the same jihad. The secular theories that have waged this jihad have consistently been scientific dictatorships edified by Darwinism. So we just bring it back around to what are we actually talking about here? Let's remind ourselves the politics of lying. What does that mean? What is this I'm trying to say here? There are people lying to you today. Some know they're lying. Others don't know they're lying. They're not perceptive enough. They don't care enough. They do move around like they're kind of robotic. But there are people out there who know they're lying to you. And they believe that they're doing it for the right reason. Because we have to save the earth. Right? And the only way to save the earth is the way these Gnostic people have told me, and that is to slow down human beings, to kill off a certain percentage of them. There's another section of this article called The Alchemical Mandate. I think it's the whole article. It does a really good job of something that I was attempting to do on a show with Days and Noah last summer, which was to show the alchemical nature of the movements that we're seeing around us. In other words, there's a certain ritual being played out on the public stage or in the hyperreal. Let's just see what it says here. Inevitably, the Gnostic myth of Darwinism guides its adherents to the same conclusion. Evolution requires man's assistance. Aha! There's a great contradiction to bring up someone. If evolution is such a good designer and creator, well then, why transhumanism? Why is transhumanism necessary? Why are vaccines necessary if evolution is such a good creator? If evolution is such a good selector, and we're all progressing, we're all ascending, we're getting more and more healthy and all, then what's the need for all the drugs and vaccines? What's the need for the transhumanism? That's a question that needs to be asked. Through societal intervention, socio-political utopians believe that humanity can facilitate its own evolutionary development and eventually immanentize the Eschaton. Freemason and Darwin apologist T.H. Huxley, I told you. There's a Huxley under every rock. Wrote this. He said, social progress means a checking of the cosmic process at every step, and the substitution for it of another. Check that out. Social progress, according to a Huxley, which is of course a bloodline establishmentarianism fallen angel sort of perspective being placed into the mind of man here. So social progress means a checking of the cosmic process at every step. So, if evolution is such a good creator and evolution is such a good selector and we're getting so much better, then why do these Gnostics and these Darwinians feel that we have to check? We have to stop and make sure that everything's evolving the way we want it to evolve. But he goes a step further. He says social progress means a checking of the cosmic process of evolution at every step and the substitution for it of another, which may be called the ethical process, the end of which is not the survival of those who happen to be the fittest. In respect of the whole of the conditions which exist, but of those who are ethically the best. So it's not just survival of the fittest, it's survival of the ethically best. In actuality, Huxley was reiterating a central mandate of Masonic doctrine, right? The idea that when I join the lodge, the only reason I'm doing it is because I want to become a better man. That's the way the Masons promote the experience of being a brother in their fraternity, is just men wanting to better themselves. That's all. But, in actuality, Huxley was reiterating a central mandate of Masonic doctrine, the alchemical transformation of man into a god. So it's not just making yourself better, it's apotheosis. I'm going to ascend to godhood. Now, I just listened to a man last night. He gave a lecture on the history of Freemasonry. And he didn't say anything about that. He didn't say anything about apotheosis, man becoming a god. Wonder why he didn't mention that. Masonic scholar W.L. Wilmshurst provides a summation of this core precept. He says this, the evolution of man into an Ubermensch or a Superman, was always the purpose of the ancient mysteries. We're talking about the mystery schools here, mystery religions. And the real purpose of modern Masonry is not the social and charitable purposes to which so much attention is paid. It's not the Shriners driving around in a little go-karts and collecting money for St. Jude's Hospital, but the expediting of the spiritual evolution of those who aspire to perfect their own nature and transform it into a more godlike quality. Remember, none of this is at harmony with Christianity. Christianity is the submission of one's will to the ultimate will of God, who knows the beginning from the end and has promised to fill us with His Spirit and to work through us and glorify Himself through us. Over here on this other side, it has to do more with man becoming the God. In other words, a creator. It goes on to say, and this is a definite science, a royal art, which it is possible for each of us to put into practice, whilst to join the craft for any other purpose than to study and pursue this science is to misunderstand its meaning. So to join the Masons because you want to do good and do charities? No, you've misunderstood the point of the Masons, according to the Masons, because that's not the point. The point is apotheosis, man becoming God. Freemasonry rejects the belief in man's creation by a supernatural God. This contention is clearly articulated in the Constitution of the Great Council of Turkey, which was organized by 33rd degree Masons, honorary 33rd degree Masons. It says in a very early age and according to an inorganic process. Organic life came to be. Wait a minute. Maybe I should give this more gravitas. In a very early age and according to an inorganic process. Organic life came to be. In order to produce cellular organisms, cells came together in groups. Later, intelligence sprang forth, and human beings were born. But from where? We keep asking ourselves this question. Was it from God's breathing over formless mud? It says here, we reject the explanation of an abnormal kind of creation, a kind of creation that excludes man. Why is this important? Because the thinking, the Masonic thinking, matches perfectly the globalist, technocratic, utopian thinking that wants to get man walking in the same line together, but without Jesus Christ, because you can't have a follower of Jesus Christ in your new order, because your new order is founded on lies, and it's very difficult to lie to a follower of Jesus Christ. That's it, summed up. But what kind of creative role does man attain according to Masonic doctrine? 33rd honorary, 33rd degree Freemason Manly P. Hall may have provided the answer when he wrote this. Man is a god in the making, he said. And as in the mystic myths of Egypt, on the potter's wheel, he is being molded. When his light shines out to lift and preserve all things, he receives the triple crown of godhood and joins that throng of master masons who in their robe of blue and gold are seeking to dispel the darkness of night with the triple light of the Masonic Lodge. Yeah, you know. So herein, though, is the Darwinian metaphysical claim of self-creation. Freemasonry, Darwinism, the globalist, technocratic, utopianism, modern atheism, but it is interesting when you note that you couldn't openly announce that you're an atheist and become a member of a Masonic lodge. Isn't that interesting? And I guess that is simply because materialists are not allowed. Because if you don't understand that there's a spiritual war occurring in the world today, then how do you fight that war? So the Masons, being involved in the spiritual war that's going on today very clearly by trying to create God-men, can't have anybody coming in their ranks who doesn't affirm that there's a spiritual realm. Because it is their duty to fight on the front lines of the spiritual war against the followers of Jesus Christ. Goes on to say here, Mason's talking about man is God in the making. And as in the mystic myths of Egypt on the potter's wheel, he's being molded. When his light shines out to lift and preserve all things, he receives the triple crown of godhood and joins that throng of master masons, seeking to dispel darkness. In other words, bring truth, right? It's supposed to be about truth. But what kind of truth? Pragmatic truth? The truth that sounds right, that feels right, that makes sense right here? Or the eternal, immutable truth that has never changed and will never change? No, that truth is dangerous. That's why there can't be followers of Jesus Christ in the new system. That's why they have to be shoved aside. They have to be mitigated. They have to be marginalized. So in here anyway, we see the Darwinian metaphysical claim of self-creation, which provides and anyone who's atheistic evolution, you come to some point where you have to figure out what was that first cause. And it wasn't you. It wasn't you. And Gnosticism's doctrine of self-salvation, being your own savior. Evidently, the creative role reserved for humanity is the role of the Creator himself. 33rd degree Mason J.D. Buck condenses this contention into one simple statement. He says this: the only personal God Freemasonry accepts is humanity as one. All of humanity is the only personal God that Freemasonry accepts. The only personal God. In other words, you have to believe that you are God. Ultimately is the training. And when you come in, of course, they'll just ask you, do you have a spiritual stance? Are you a spiritual person? And anyone who would claim to, do you believe that there is a God? And you can't continue into the order unless you accept or admit or proclaim that, yes, I believe in a God. You can believe in more than one God to be a Mason, but you can't be an atheist according to their own doctrine. Because the only personal God Freemasonry accepts is humanity in toto, which humanity therefore is only the only personal God that there is. You are your own God, according to their order. This was one of Illuminati founder Adam Weishaupt's inner Areopagites, a man made perfect as a God without God. This religion is nothing new. Throughout the years, it has reappeared under numerous appellations. W. Warren Wager enumerates this religion's numerous manifestations. He says this: 19th and earliest 20th century thought teems with time-bound emergent deities. Scores of thinkers preached some sort of faith in what is potential in time, in place of the traditional Christian and mystical faith in a power outside of time. Hegel's Weltgeist and Spencer's organismic. That's a tough one to say and not mess up. Spencer's organismic humanity inevitably improving itself by the laws of evolution. Nietzsche's doctrine of superhumanity, the concept of a finite God given currency by J.S. Mill, Hastings Rashdahl, and William James, the vitalism of Bergson and Shaw, the emergent evolutionism of Samuel Alexander and Lloyd Morgan. The faith of progress itself, that is huge. That is definitely a religion that exists today that you can see. Having faith in progress. Progressives. That is their faith, their religion is progress. Progress where? Progress toward what? Only progress toward our goals. Their goals. Especially the idea of progress as built into the evolutionary scheme of things is in every way the psychological equivalent of a religion. A core doctrinal precept of the religion is the alchemical mandate for the conscious engineering of humanity's apotheosis. So the idea, of course, being that humanity is ascending toward godhood. T.H. Huxley's protege, Freemason and Fabian socialist H.G. Wells, presented an allegorized depiction of the alchemical mission to achieve apotheosis in The Island of Dr. Moreau. Astute readers will recognize the character of Dr. Moreau as an instrument of the Masonic craft. Like the practitioners of the royal art, Dr. Moreau consciously emulates the evolutionary laboratory of the world. Years later, Darwinian fundamentalist and high priest of scientism, Carl Sagan, Mr. Extraordinary Claims Require Extraordinary Evidence himself. Carl Sagan would recapitulate this alchemical mandate for the emulation of nature's evolutionary laboratory. So Carl Sagan, keeping Carl Jung alive, keeping Gnosticism alive and well. In his 1980 book, Cosmos, Carl Sagan asserted that through the blind forces of evolution, man had come to inhabit the position from which he could now consciously control and direct the evolutionary process. That's the kind of arrogance that causes global floods. Don't you agree? Sagan asserted that through the blind forces of evolution, man had come to inhabit the position from which he could now consciously control and direct the evolutionary process. Folks, there's more than one conservative scholar even that will argue the whole point of Noah's flood was to destroy a type of hybrid human being that had resulted from these sons of God mating with daughters of man and creating what are known as Nephilim. So the idea that man controlling evolution, transhumanism, we've been here before, folks. We've been here before. Wanting to control the DNA of mankind with very opportunistic vaccinations, perhaps. Just a thought. The scientific dictatorships of communism, fascism represented two such efforts to consciously engineer humanity's evolution and immanentize the Eschaton on earth. Yet these two Gnostic experiments in socio-political utopianism are but microcosms of a larger religious vision. It is the religious vision of the supranational elite, the global elite. They live beyond nations. Fanatical in their blind faith in the Gnostic myth of Darwinism, the supranational elite still pursues the same objectives today. And what is that perspective? Resculpting reality through a new truth, which is in fact a noble lie. Martin explains that the humanist precursors to speculative Masonry desired a special gnosis. They believed that this special gnosis was a secret knowledge of how to master the blind forces of nature for socio-political purpose. Another important point, if you don't think there are occultists working in every level of government, well, I think you know better. The subjugation, wherever there's power, you're going to find occultism. It's just there because that's the goal. Occultism is power. The subjugation and manipulation of nature is a theme consistently recapitulated by the socio-political utopians. And these are the people that I talk about a lot. The globalist technocratic utopians. These people who are perpetuating a noble lie, anthropomorphic climate change, a global pandemic, for example, and the need for a great reset. There is no need for that except for that is the goal for what the Great Reset will establish, which is a global caste system, a ruling elite, and then everyone else will fall in under that. The subjugation and manipulation of nature is a theme consistently brought up by these utopians. One socio-political utopian to reiterate this theme was Fabian socialist Bertrand Russell, well-known atheist, good author, put together a very clear and extensive textbook on origins of Western philosophy, but who has an obvious blind spot. Bertrand Russell, in his book Religion and Society, said this: The way in which science arrives at its beliefs is quite different from that of medieval theology. Experience has shown that it is dangerous to start from general principles and proceed deductively, both because the principles may be untrue and because the reasoning based upon them may be fallacious. Science starts not from large assumptions, but from particular facts discovered by observation or experiment. From a number of such facts, a general rule is arrived at, of which, if it is true, the facts in question are instances. Science thus encourages abandonment of the search for absolute truth, which belongs to any theory that can be successfully employed in inventions or in predicting the future. Technical truth is a matter of degree. A theory from which more successful inventions and predictions spring is truer than one which gives rise to fewer. Knowledge ceases to be a mental mirror of the universe and becomes merely a practical tool in the manipulation of matter. Fabian socialist, Bertrand Russell. For the socio-political utopian, science represents a special gnosis, a special knowledge, designed to manipulate matter and reconfigure reality itself. It is an instrument for the resculpting of prima materia, the first matter, the primary, or I would say even the earth, and immanentizing the Eschaton. The end is imminent. Technology has become the chief means of achieving this alchemical transformation of reality. Technology's potential for such an application is evident in the etymological origins of the appellation itself. It is derived from the Greek word techne, which means craft. Simply defined, crafting is the skillful creation of something. Hence, expressions such as outstanding craftsmanship or master of the craft. In the context of socio-political utopianism, crafting is the skillful creation, or more succinctly, the resculpting of reality itself. The special gnosis of science has provided the means through techne. Marc Pesce, co-inventor of virtual reality modeling language, elaborates upon techne's role in manipulating matter. He says this, quote, "Each endpoint of techne has an expression in the modern world as a myth of fundamental direction, the mastery of matter." That is magic, my friends. That's what ritual magic seeks to do. Anyway, this is the central precept of socio-political utopianism, mastering reality itself. Remember? Creating a new reality, because you have to get rid of ultimate immutable truth. Because for your order to work, it's going to have to be built upon a lie, a noble lie, a lie that gets everyone walking in the same direction, but without Jesus Christ. This is the central precept of socio-political utopianism, mastering reality itself. Scientology, for example, provides an excellent example of this paradigm. Founded by sci-fi author L. Ron Hubbard, this religious organization espouses doctrines that closely align with Gnostic thought. No surprise there. For instance, Hubbard exhibited a distinctly Gnostic aversion towards the human body. In History of Man, he described it this way: the possession of a body is a liability. For through that body, the being can be given pain, can be regimented by the routine demands of eating, and care from harm. Today, we live in a vast cult called Worship the Body. Medical doctors, school teachers, parents, traffic officers, the whole society unites into this war cry: care for the body. Also, Hubbard religiously adhered to the Gnostic myth of Darwinism. In Dianetics, his most famous work, he wrote this. He said, "It is fairly well accepted in these times that life in all forms evolved from the basic building blocks, the virus and the cell. Its only relevance to Dianetics is that such a proposition works. And actually, that is all we ask of Dianetics. There is no point to writing here a vast tome on biology and evolution. We can add some chapters to those things, but Charles Darwin did his job well, and the fundamental principles of evolution can be found in his and other works. The proposition on which Dianetics was originally entered was evolution. Interesting, right? That's the foundation of Scientology. According to Scientology, reality is not governed by immutable principles. Once again, say that another way. According to Scientology, reality is not governed by eternal truth or universal invariance, absolute truths. On the contrary, according to Scientology, reality is a malleable, a workable, a changeable fabric of which can be manipulated through technology. Thus, L. Ron Hubbard, contends that man must not face reality, but must make reality face him. The noble lie. I hope you're catching on now. This is the noble lie underlies all of this. The rejection of God and immutable eternal truth, and the exchange of that for a more noble lie, a more convenient truth. Eventually, Scientology became the subject of an ethnographic study conducted by a sociologist named William Sims Bainbridge. Bainbridge is also an adherent of an emergent scientific religion called transhumanism. That is William Sims Bainbridge. Transhumanism, which promotes the breeding of genetically enriched forms of post-human beings. Professor Catherine Hales describes this post-human condition. Once again, let me just throw it out there. If Darwinian evolution is such a good selector and such a good creator, then why do you need transhumanism? Their religion breaks down very quickly. Professor Catherine Hales describes this post-human condition this way. She says, quote, "In the post-human, there are no essential differences or absolute demarcations between bodily existence and computer simulation, cybernetic mechanism, and biological organism, robot technology, and human goals." This is very important. She said this, in the post-human, or the type of human being that the globalist order is trying to create right now, starting first with our psychology by pounding us with fear, initiating us into the immanentization of the Eschaton. We're being initiated into the new Gnostic order of global peace and happiness. Being together alone, that kind of thing. But she lays this out clear. She says, in the post-human, living in the post-truth age, there are no essential differences or absolute demarcations between bodily existence and computer simulation. Another reason why the hyperreal world of screens, television, computer, phone, screens, where we're virtual reality goggles, where we invest most of the hours of our lives, of our days, inside this, that's the hyperreal world. We're already connected to it. We're connected to it through psychic tethers that pull us back over and over, sometimes when we don't need to be there. So as she said, there are no differences. There are no lines between the human body, the flesh and blood, and a computer simulation. So now, at this point, so far anyway, the body hasn't been abridged in any sort of massive way yet that we can tell. you might consider spraying above head or something that goes into the food, a way of changing people, and that would be a good argument. But nothing obvious that is visual yet. But that the goal is to make it so that the person really can't tell the difference when they're in their human existence or in their transhuman existence. And you can't overlook the transgender movement as a part of psychological priming to get people used to the idea of transhumanism. How long before children start telling their parents, "Mommy, I don't feel like a human. I feel like a cyborg." And then, so they start treating the child like a robot. I mean, does that sound crazy? Because I know 10 years ago, we could go back and say some things to you 10 years ago that are true today that you would have thought were crazy back then. Like Scientologists, transhumanists adhere to the Gnostic myth of Darwinism. Reiterating the contention of Darwinian fundamentalist Carl Sagan, transhumanists believe that evolution can be consciously managed and directed. Warren Robinett elaborates and says this: if mind is program and data, and we control the hardware and the software, then we can make changes as we see fit. This is a little bit of a new age idea here too, that through meditation you can go in and end illness and reform your body and all of these things. What will human-like intelligence evolve into if it is freed from the limits of the human meat machine? Remember, that's Gnostic language. And humans can change and improve their own hardware. What are the limits, he says? It's hard to say. The changes would perhaps be goal-directed, but what goals would be chosen for self-directed evolution? Who decides? Once again, where are the ethics? Where's the morality? Where's the objective morality? What does a human become when freed from pain, hunger, lust, and pride? That's significant. What does a human become when he's freed from pain, hunger, lust, and pride? That is the goal. Even without turning us into physical robots, just even by the mind control, by the shaping of your thoughts every day with fear and initiation to get you to the point where you would be freed from pain, hunger, lust, and pride. But not in a heavenly way, because remember, no followers of Jesus Christ are allowed here. Because we're going to have to tell a lot of noble lies, and you just don't seem to be able to successfully lie to a follower of Jesus Christ, so we got to get rid of them. But what would your life be without pain, hunger, lust, and pride? While Robinett is speaking rhetorically, it is interesting that he chronically compares humanity to a machine. As Professor Hales makes abundantly clear, the post-human condition is man's transformation into machine. Or maybe not even to machine at all, but just into the hyperreal. Personhood lives in the hyperreal. Maybe that is post-human. This could be the intended outcome of self-directed evolution. Transhumanists openly express their derision for the human condition. For instance, British roboticist Kevin Warwick candidly renounced his humanity. Okay? He says, "I was born human, but this was an accident of fate, a condition merely of time and place." He renounced his humanity and became what? Surely he didn't become something lower. Surely he became something higher, right? I mean, he said of himself anyway. He said, "This prompts a disturbing question. If the human condition was some sort of biological accident, then what is mankind's ultimate evolutionary destiny?" Bart Kosko, a professor of electrical engineering, reveals the final destination on the evolutionary map. Biology is not destiny. It was never more than tendency. It was just nature's first quick and dirty way to compute with meat. Chips are destiny. This aversion towards humanity echoes the precepts of an older religion. C. Christopher Hook elaborates and says, transhumanism is in some ways a new incarnation of Gnosticism. It sees the body as simply the first prosthesis we all learn to manipulate. As Christians, we have long rejected the Gnostic claims that the human body is evil. Embodiment is fundamental to our identity, designed by God and sanctified by the incarnation and bodily resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Unlike Gnostics, transhumanists reject the notion of the soul and substitute it for the idea of an information pattern. Evidently, the Gnostic ambitions of socio-political utopianism are alive and well, and so is the noble lie. In fact, in the Gnostic tradition of Ariosophy, transhumanism advocates the enthronement of an elite. In other words, that there's only certain people that are allowed to be in charge. We all know that by now, don't we, right? The old chestnut that we all tell our kids, or maybe I didn't tell my kid this, but I'm not sure I was told this, but I know a lot of people did hear this and were told this. You can be anything you want to be. You can be president. You can be Secretary General of the United Nations if you want to be. Not unless you carry the right blood. Or the right family tree. This new post-human elite is dubbed the gen-rich class. According to transhumanist Professor Lee Silver, the end of this century will witness the ascendancy of the gen-rich elite. All aspects of the economy, the media, the entertainment industry, and the knowledge industry will be controlled by members of the gen-rich class. We just call these bloodlines. We know who these are. Naturals will work as low-paid service providers or as laborers. Remember, we're trying to create two distinct classes here. The ruling class and then the rest of us, whatever they want to call that class. The ruling class will be the ones who are transhumanists. They'll be the ones who are receiving organs that never fail. Of course, they're going to see this will not work. This will not work. Of course, this very thing is what caused the flood that wiped out all of life except for 8 people. So, not a good area to be getting into. And there's a reason for it. Of course, there's a reason for it. It's not because it would make us better or more spiritual. It's because it would ultimately harm us and harm everything around us, that we would destroy things even quicker. Like the socio-political utopianism of Marxism, transhumanism will not end class distinctions. Instead, it will just create new ones. So the globalist technocratic utopia is not about equality at all. It's about establishing a new order of classes. And you don't get to pick. If transhumanism were merely some marginalized organization, then such beliefs would be somewhat laughable. However, this is not the case. With chapters in more than 20 countries and luminaries occupying numerous academic institutions, the transhumanist movement is a formidable force. Moreover, many of its members have been actively engaged in government-sponsored research. Clearly, the movement is more than the average cult. The Gnostic religions of Scientology and transhumanism represent links in an ideational chain, which finds its origins in ancient Mesopotamia, where we're studying now. Book of Daniel, Babylonian Empire, 2 forms. There was an early Babylonian Empire and then a Neo-Babylonian Empire. They are philosophical and religious scions of the mystery religion. One of the perks of the study of Daniel that we're doing now is we're learning about one or more of the mystery religions and how they function, how they functioned in the context of the book of Daniel, anyway, around that time. Of course, variants of the ancient mysteries largely constitute the religious doctrines of the elite. Like communism and fascism, Scientology and transhumanism are just microcosms of the ruling class religious vision for man. A stratified society of rulers and slaves, eugenical regimentation, a technologically altered reality, the complete obliteration of all those things that define humanity. All these comprise the anatomy of the Eschaton that they seek to immanentize, the end that they want to bring right up and meet. A stratified society of rulers, a ruling class, a eugenical regimentation, a technologically altered reality. What are we talking about here? What's the form of this new government? The form of this new ideology? It's communitarianism. It is the idea of your individual rights being your individual rights being a burden on society. Therefore, your individual rights need to be set aside. You need to be bigger than that. You need to grow out of having individual rights. And you need to become part of the global community because we're telling you do. Because if not, the noble lie is going to come get you. This communitarianism, this new globalist ideology is being pitched to you as the new enlightened form of political discourse. It says that you're selfish if you insist on individual rights and freedoms, whereas in Scripture we understand that individual rights and freedoms are sacred. Very biblical concept. Nations are a biblical concept. Why? Because God understands us. God understands us and knows that we need a certain hierarchy in order to live without destroying one another completely. Of course, all of these things be pitched to you inside the realm of Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, UN Agenda 21. And it will be pitched to you as it's for the good of the planet. It's all for the good of the planet. It's for everyone's security. It's for your health. It's to protect your children. It's to limit workplace violence. It's to stop bullying. Listen, this is to protect the rights of those people in the future. What people and what rights, we don't know what they mean by that. In a nutshell, it calls for governments to take control of all land use and not leave any of the decision-making in the hands of private property owners. You can see this coming to fruition right now. Individual rights in general are to give way to the needs of communities. And communities will be defined and established by a very arbitrary means. Perhaps, maybe this community will be all those who've tested positive for whatever. And this community will be those who refuse to take a test, or that community will be those who refuse to take a vaccine. Individual rights in general are to give way to the needs of communities. That is the same thing as prison. When you no longer have individual rights, you just become one of the community with no individual voice. That's prison. That's how prison operates. That's why prison operates that way. It's because it's supposed to be a rehabilitative process. People should be rounded up off the land and packed into human settlements, or what they call islands of human habitation. United Nations Agenda 21 cites that Americans being affluent, or the fact that in America there's less suffering than perhaps there are in other parts of the world, that's looked at as being a major problem that has to be corrected. by the globalist movement. The United States has to be brought down to the level of a third world country before any equality can exist. And the way is this done? Lower the living standards of Americans artificially. Destroy the economy. Put people under pressure. Make them have to live forced austerity. It calls for the lowering of the standard of living for Americans so that the people in poorer countries will have more. Will they have more? Because, in fact, when we see America, when we see the economy of the United States of America stop, it causes a ripple effect around the world where many more people die around the world than would actually die here in the United States of America. So is it really better for the world when you tear down the economy of the United States of America? Doesn't seem to be. The evidence doesn't show that it is. But that's the general idea. That you must be. In other words, that's the point of the noble lies, to get you to believe that we don't deserve what we have. Now, of course, as Christians, we do understand we don't deserve anything, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in the secular sense, because they're certainly not talking to us from the Judeo-Christian worldview. That's not what they're speaking from. But the idea is to make you feel guilty that there are other countries out there who are less developed than you, so that you'll be willing to go along with their plan to create equality in the world. My friends, equality is not a good thing if equality means equal suffering all around. And these policies, these policies that we're talking about now that are underpinned by all we've talked about today date back to the 1970s, but it's got its real start in 1992 at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio, and that is where this document came from. You can find this on the United Nations website. Anybody tells you, the Agenda 21 stuff, you're a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. There it is. There you go. Go read it. It's on the United Nations website. You can order that book on Amazon if you like. It's all there. Nothing's hidden. Nothing's hidden. It's just that people are extremely lazy and would rather tell you that you're crazy than to do 5 minutes worth of research. So these things date back to the 1970s, but this document here got its origin in 1992 at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, when President Bush, that would be H.W. Bush, signed on to it along with the leaders of 178 other countries. Here's the point. Because it is a soft law, it did not have to be ratified by Congress. In other words, it's a non-binding agreement. Oh, that makes me feel better. It's a non-binding agreement. That means, I guess if we don't like it, we can toss it aside. No, it's not what it means. It means that the Congress doesn't have to ratify it. In other words, functioning like independent businesses or corporations, certain non-governmental organizations come in and influence your local government. They don't need to influence the federal government because the federal government is in lockstep with globalism. Where they need to do the work is influencing local governments to implement these policies. So they are working on the ground level in your backyard right now. And that's why you have to be aware of your local government and be engaged in it. Now, if you're turned off on the political system because of the presidential race and what looks to be like there's just obvious fraud going on constantly in the election system, that's one thing. But don't let yourself be turned off to the local political scene where you live, because that's what affects you immediately. And you can make a change. You can cause change locally. We see it happening all the time. There is a resistance to this movement. It's out there and it's active. You just don't hear about it on television or in mainstream YouTubers or whatever. So then after H.W. Bush signed us on, the following year, President Clinton began to implement this policy by creating the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and on from there. We've gone into this, the idea of redevelopment of the cities, of the local lands, taking lands and property out of the hands of private citizens. As we finish up here, I'll share a couple of articles with you that are pretty interesting. That I think you guys might find these to be maybe even a little encouraging. Let's see, before we go off the air here today, let's look at these couple articles here. Supreme Court rules against Cuomo's coronavirus limits, with the new Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett playing a key role. I've heard a lot of people being critical of the new Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, specifically because she's Catholic, calling her, oh, she's loyal to the Pope and she's this and that. Once again, that might be the case, but we have to be very careful about doing that. You don't know someone's heart. Because someone is a Catholic, openly a Catholic, you don't know what their understanding of the deity of Jesus Christ, you don't know what their true acceptance of the Marian doctrine is. So be careful and just don't get caught up in those kind of ad hominem attacks on people. You don't really know what she may or may not affirm about Catholicism. But anyway, this article says the U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday night blocked New York Governor Andrew Cuomo from reimposing strict attendance caps at worship services in areas hit hard by the novel coronavirus. The court ruled 5-4 to bar the governor from enforcing his October 6th cluster initiative against houses of worship that sued to challenge the restrictions. Religious liberty is being infringed upon here. Persecution of Christians in the United States has begun. This is our marker in time. Now, this might all go back to normal. It may or may not. But if it does, just remember, still, here was the marker. Next time, it'll go farther. It says the order was also the first in which Justice Amy Coney Barrett played a decisive role. Barrett, who was President Trump's third Supreme Court nominee, joined the court on October 27 after winning Senate confirmation following the September 18 death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, the then Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, is seen. Okay, that's her picture there. Meanwhile, Chief Justice John Roberts joined the court's liberal wing in the dissenting opinions. Very interesting that Roberts went in as a justice under the ideas that he was a conservative guy and he hasn't behaved that way at all. So maybe a Trojan horse or maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, Roberts joined the court's liberal wing in the dissenting opinion, which stated that the court had acted rashly. Cuomo's initiative had created color-coded limits on mass gatherings and business operations in an effort to stem the outbreak in the New York City areas that were experiencing a surge in cases, according to Bloomberg News. What's the noble lie here, my friends? Now, let's take what we've learned. Gnosticism, Darwinism, the noble lie. We have to get everyone walking in the same direction, but without Jesus Christ, because we're going to have to tell some big lies to get people to go with us on this trip. Okay, so what's going on here? His initiatives had created color-coded limits on mass gatherings and business operations. Okay, so he's got a response to something. What is this response to? And an effort to stem the outbreak. To stem the outbreak in New York City areas. Ever since there was a surge in cases. So, to stem the outbreak of cases, I've got one for you. Here's how you could stem the outbreak of cases tomorrow and cut them off. Almost to zero. Stop testing the entire population. It's not necessary. World Health Organization says it's not necessary. Almost every doctor or since honest scientist that you find says it's not necessary for everyone to be tested. But as long as everyone is tested, outbreaks are going to keep happening. So what is the noble lie here? The noble lie here is noble, of course. It's not actually noble, but according to them, it's noble to them. The noble lie here is that there is actually an outbreak of something that's killing people. Remember, this is no one's saying here that there is no new virus, not making that kind of a claim. Don't have to make that kind of claim. You don't have to go all the way down in that rabbit hole to find all the dirty stuff. It's all right around the top. And here's the problem right off the bat, that the assumption is that there are, because cases are, the outbreak is, there's the noble lie. We can see what's going on here. It was aimed at worship services at some synagogues and Roman Catholic churches in parts of Brooklyn and Queens. That's interesting, isn't it? Aimed at Jews and Catholics. Why don't they report Protestant Christians in this article? Interesting. Because they are also limited. In the hardest hit areas, which were designated red zones, the state limited attendance in houses of worship to 25% of their capacity, or 10 people, whichever is fewer. The majority said his limits violated the First Amendment's protection of the free exercise of religion. Of course it does. Justice Neil Gorsuch, in the concurring opinion, said Cuomo had treated religious activities less favorably than non-religious ones, according to the New York Times. Gorsuch said this. He says, "It is time, past time, to make plain that while the pandemic poses many grave challenges, there is no world in which the Constitution tolerates color-coded executive edicts that reopen liquor stores and bike shops but shutter churches, synagogues, and mosques," wrote Gorsuch, who was also named to the court by Trump. So, possibly a voice of reason. So at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it is always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your distal points and meridians. He continued, according to a tweet from The Economist correspondent Stephen Mazie. Who knew public health would so perfectly align with secular convenience? The ruling was seen. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, look, folks, there is pushback against this nonsense. I think something that we're seeing happen here is we're seeing a battle happen between 2 or maybe 3 factions of establishment elites behind the scenes, people that we never see. They're not people in government. They're people who are above government. They're the people who control governments. And perhaps they're kind of warring with one another. I've had this suspicion for a while, but no way to prove it. Now, in the dissenting opinion, Roberts, who was supposed to be conservative, explained why the court's liberals opposed the decision. He said this: numerical capacity limits of 10 and 25 people, depending on the applicable zone, do seem unduly restrictive, Roberts wrote, according to Times. It's not necessary, however, for us to rule on that serious and difficult question at this time. That's a cop-out. That's obviously a cop-out. I mean, you're trying to take a stance, a political stance there, because you cannot give a plain reading of the applicable elements of the Constitution and come back with that sort of statement. The governor might reinstate the restrictions, he continued, but he also might not, and it's a significant matter to override the determinations made by public health officials concerning what is necessary for public safety in the midst of a deadly pandemic. Language is everything, folks. You might have a pandemic, but is it deadly? Is it both of those things at the same time, deadly and pandemic? Yeah, the evidence doesn't show that. So what we see here is a justice using politically hot language to support his dissenting or his opinion here that they ought not be intervening. Why? Because determinations made by public health officials. Scientism. You see, the assumption there is that there are no public health officials who disagree with all of this. The assumption there is that all public health officials say, yes, the governor was right. That's not the case. So there underlies the noble lie. The noble lie being that there is an existential threat to humanity and that we must listen to the technocrats to get through this. None of that's true. The American Civil Liberties Union condemned the decision and warned it could undermine New York's efforts to curb the pandemic. So the American Civil Liberties Union isn't really about civil liberties at all, is it? Not really. No, it's about technocracy. It's about telling you what you can and can't think. It's about telling you what you can and can't say. Because you could not be about civil liberties, could not be about civil liberties and support any of these draconian mitigation efforts, especially like you've seen in New York, effectively destroying New York and its economy, which means you've destroyed the capital of Earth, I guess some people call it. I mean, so Earth doesn't, colloquially, just as a figure of speech, people call New York the capital of planet Earth. But so in a sense, Earth's capital has been bombed out, has been left desolate, just in time for a new one to arise. It's for a new one to come up. I wonder where the new capital of Earth will appear from. Maybe Davos. Maybe at the Bilderberg Hotel. The freedom to worship is one of our most cherished fundamental rights, but it does not include a license to harm others. Wow. It does not include a license to harm others or endanger public health, said Daniel Mock, director of the ACLU program of Freedom of Religion and Belief. Well, how about that? Don't we feel good and safe that we've got Daniel Mock as the director of the program of Freedom of Religion at the ACLU? Don't we feel good that he's out there looking out for our best interest? When he says, freedom of worship does not include a license to harm others or endanger public health. What's the problem with that statement? There is an enormous burden of proof on him to follow up this claim that by going to church, you're harming others and endangering public health. You have to make that case. And they don't make that case. They just say it as though it's true. Scientism. They preach it from a pulpit, from a bully pulpit. New York City, once the global epicenter of the virus, has reported a steady rise in infections in recent weeks, prompting Mayor Bill de Blasio to close public schools for the second time, further destroying the progress of kids. Now, look, I've said everything I need to say about public school and what it does, what it's done to people, but listen, it's what they've replaced it with here is something even worse. And because it all came at once, where everything was cut off at once. That's not a healthy way to do anything. And you see children, we covered this in the video I did with Days of Noah on this channel last week or a couple weeks ago. We showed you the article that came out of the UK, and it's happening around the world as well. But in the UK, the article was speaking of children who had regressed. They haven't been going to school, their routines have been out of whack, and they've regressed. Not just academically, but they've regressed from eating with spoons and forks. They've regressed back into diapers. Folks, that's not a regression that comes from not going to school. That's a regression that comes from trauma. That's what trauma looks like in a child. Trauma and fear. So, what are we doing? Trauma and fear based on what? Based on what evidence? So then, of course, the case can be made that children are purposefully being forced to regress back to diapers for a noble lie, for something that's not really true, but that's intended to bring everyone together in unity. Is it true? New York has reported more than 300,000 cases and 24,000 deaths related to COVID-19. Related to COVID-19. So if I had a friend who tested positive for COVID-19 and that person, I was just overwhelmed and saddened by that person's positive test results, and it caused me to have a heart attack and die, that would be a death that was related to COVID-19. The language doesn't mean anything. Cases, the word case, the way it's reported in the media and on worldometers and all that, doesn't mean anything. All it means is, here are the numbers that we're giving you today. The assumption behind that is for every one case on that total, you could follow back and find that one person who legitimately tested positive with a real and legitimate test, which we know does not exist. And none of that can be shown to be the case. New York's temporary restrictions on indoor gatherings do not discriminate against houses of worship and, in fact, treat them better than comparable non-religious gatherings, said Donna Lieberman, executive director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. The Supreme Court's decision will unfortunately undermine New York's efforts to curb the pandemic. So, in other words here, a victory of some sort was won, but we got to see in behind the scenes a little bit when these justices wrote their opinions. And we've still got the noble lie being pushed out there. Efforts to curb the pandemic. Everything is being done for your safety. Don't you get it? What are you foolish or something? You don't understand that we're looking out for your safety? We're just trying to protect you. We're trying to keep you safe. We're trying to keep you secure. That is exactly what the warden says to his prisoners every day. A similar article here that we'll touch on real fast. South Australia revokes draconian lockdown after revelation one person lied to contact tracers. See, another very good point here. What in the world would you put any faith in something called contact tracing? Why in the world would you do that? Why would anyone assume that that's any kind of a good way to keep up with something? Knowing how unreliable people are. It could only lead to one thing. Masks not working could lead to one thing. And contact tracing not working can lead to one thing. More lockdowns. More reason to keep everyone away from everyone physically. So you have to look carefully into the rhetoric here. But anyway, let's see what this article is about. The lockdown took effect. This is from, oh boy. This is at least a week old. Anyway, the lockdown took effect yesterday and banned people from leaving their homes unless for emergency medical reasons or to buy food. Folks, 5 years ago, people thought this is impossible. I hope you're catching on now. Police even confirmed via Twitter that people who walk their dogs outside would be in violation of the law. What law? And this prompted a huge backlash. Thank goodness. But now, as Summit News' Paul Joseph Watson reports, just a day later, the lockdown is set to be revoked after authorities admitted that one person who sparked the decision had lied to contact tracers. Interesting, isn't it? One person had lied? How about everybody's lying? How about they're all following in on the noble lie? South Australia Premier Stephen Marshall announced the explosive finding. Is it explosive? Is it unusual? Are you surprised to find out that a contact tracer lied? Come on, people. It's so easy for them to say that, oh, this scientist that doesn't agree with the official narrative over here, oh, that guy's he's obviously lying. We know he's lying. But if we find someone who was a contact tracer lied, that's explosive news. We never expected that. We just didn't see it coming, that someone might lie about contact tracing. Anyway, the explosive finding during a Friday press conference saying that the individual in question purposely misled contact tracers. Though he told them he had visited a pizza bar linked to a local outbreak only once, he in fact worked at the establishment and had spent several shifts there during the period in question. The government has now acknowledged that the man, who was initially blamed for being a super spreader, another term that literally means nothing. It's just a spell. So if you're talking to your family this weekend, because everybody, maybe if you were one of those who went ahead and visited family and asserted your rights this week, and you've maybe heard that term, super spreader. Ooh, I don't want to be one of those. I don't want to run into one of those. What does it even mean? Sure, they'll give you a definition about tested positive or didn't test, but doesn't have any symptoms, and they're going around spread. Yeah, evidence. That's all rhetoric. The evidence for being a super spreader is non-existent. It's just a spell. But anyway, they said that this person being a super spreader had not, in fact, been the source of what authorities claimed was a super infectious strain of the virus. Folks, as long as everyone is being enchanted, is under the spell of the noble lie, they can write crap like that and people will pay attention to it. Super infectious strain of the virus. Anyway, the story didn't add up. We pursued them. We now know that they lied, said South Australia Premier Stephen Marshall. You see, it's very easy to point out how people down the chain have lied and done things wrong, but us, we up here? No, we're telling the truth. Yeah, you can trust us totally because we're up here. You see, when we're up here, you can trust us. When we're down here working at the pizza place, you can't trust that person. Unless they're saying that something that helps. Maybe authorities should have confirmed the man's story before announcing their draconian lockdown. Just a thought. Yeah, that's a good point. You might consider doing that sometime, but of course that's not what's actually happening. As of Saturday, the region will now move back into its previous lockdown tier with many restrictions being lifted again. Well, how many other lockdowns? How about all of them? How about we assume that all of them came about as the result of one greater lie, one overall so-called noble lie. A noble lie which is in politics a myth or an untruth often, but not always, of a religious nature, knowingly propagated or spread by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. In religion, it's called a pious fiction. It's a narrative that is presented as true by the author, but is considered by others to be fictional, albeit produced with an altruistic motivation. Altruistic. What is for the good of man. So we mix these two, the political noble lie and the religious pious fiction today, and we've understood that Gnosticism, that Darwinism is essentially Gnostic in what it promotes, in its metaphysics. It's Gnostic in its metaphysics. And that for that kind of order to be established, there must be a noble lie or a series of noble lies. And what is the noble lie? It is that thing that is not true. Let's read it from Plato's perspective. The noble lie is to serve as a charter myth for Plato's good city, a myth of national or civic identity In other words, this is what we're all about. We're all in this together. That's the mind control. We're all in this together. We're all in this together. We're alone together. But is there any reason for it? Is there any truth underneath that? If people can be made to believe it, they will be strongly motivated to care for the city or to care for the state and for each other. So what is the essential problem here? Assuming that you can make people do good by lying to them. Assuming that good things can come from evil things. That's the basic, and if it weren't so tragic, comic nature of this particular noble lie that we're watching take place around us now. So terrorism later became anthropomorphic climate change. The climate crisis became global health crisis. I think this one will stick for a while, but eventually the threat's going to have to come from off the planet. They're going to have to move the threat. The noble lie is going to have to be about something off planet eventually. Just seems like the natural progression, the logical outcome of all this. So, glad to see you guys still hanging out with me today. I went on a little bit longer than I had planned on that one. So let's point out a few folks here and just say hello. How's everybody doing? Let's see, Josh Carpio's out there with us. Ivan's son is with us. Objectivity Cave is with us. Good to see you out there, brother. Well, welcome. Thanks for being here. Leslie H. Chadasana Moves is here with us. Rosie Clowers out there. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. 4 in 20 is with us. Bob D. Nicholas is with us. Disciplined by God, saved by grace is here with us. Of course, Seth the Saxon is out there. Scoville 7 is with us. Miss Ostrich is with us. Thanks for being out there, folks, and keeping things together out in the chat while I'm got my attention completely over here on this other stuff. Social Slacker is with us. Claude Brown. So thanks for being here, folks. It's good to see. It's good to see a lot of new names out here. There's Reed Romans is with us again. Nana P. There's Nana P. Eddie Vasquez. Oh yeah. Once also thanks to I Believe who used that link on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there to do a donation earlier. I really appreciate that. As we get toward the end of the month, it's very helpful. Eddie Vasquez, thank you for your super chat, and Paul's Deep. Yeah, Eddie Vasquez says hello. I'm still here. Claude Brown, thanks, Claude. I'm glad you found it useful today. There's Lillian. Lillian is with us. My tongue is getting tired. Saying Lillian is a little bit harder now than it was 3 hours ago. But that's good. That's all right. All right, folks. So that's about it for today. Let me just comment on chat and moderation that goes on today. There's just this channel was very small for a long time, and then experienced some rapid growth for a while. So we've all been trying to learn on the fly about how to curate and moderate the live discussion that goes on here. Most people that watch these videos won't be even they won't be interacting with the live chat, but it's very important. The live chat is very important. It's crucial, in fact, because that's where the conversation happens while the streams are on, and people watch them after the fact too. So I just want to put out there that whoever you find out there with with a blue wrench beside their name. They've got all the authority necessary to do whatever it needs to be done out there. We've gotten together, and I've tried to. I had my friends here help me to understand the necessity for taking that very seriously, and we've got together. So whatever these guys say, I have their back completely. So that's how it is. That's how it is, and that's how it has to be. That's the only way that it can work. And just so you know, we are in contact with one another, so we know where the lines are, and we all agree. So I just want to make that point because I haven't said much about it before, but what they say, I agree with, because I know what they would say. And there's that. That's my disclaimer about that, because of the way that I do this show and these Bible studies, usually I'm not engaged in the chat until the very end when we get around to the section where I want to take some questions, some comments. So things happen without me ever seeing it, and I could not do it without. I couldn't do this. This could not be growing and being useful as it is without the help of those people who are that you see there in the chat, who are helping out as moderators. And it doesn't take that many people, but it does take a few who are dedicated to it, and I appreciate them very much. So just understand that we're all on the same page. All right. All right, so is Days of Noah on right now? Am I missing the Days of Noah show? That means I got to go watch Days of Noah now. All right, my friends, thank you for being with me today and for being a part of this process today. I think this was an unusual topic, but one I hadn't planned before that just came together in the last couple of days that I think is useful. And I appreciate you being here, all of you. Thank you for your support. Support that has come in lately has been very encouraging, and I really appreciate it. I feel blessed to be able to do this. I feel blessed to be able to come here and do this full time and be here every day and have a place to work from. It's an incredible blessing, so I appreciate all of you who support this work. Thank you, my friends, and I appreciate especially those of you out there who pray for this ministry and this outreach, this channel, which is an outreach of the ministry. And for those of you who helped me out with it, I am very grateful. So God bless you, my friends. We'll see you again live here tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. for our regular devotional for the week, where we get together and go over we look at a specific area of our faith and try to understand it more deeply. That's what we do on Sunday afternoons at 4 p.m. here. So join me for that. Thank you, Rosie. Rosie jumped in at the last minute. Thank you for that donation, Rosie Clower, a big supporter of the ministry. Thank you very much. All right, my friends. I'll see you tomorrow right here at 4 p.m.